Aaron,
Tim,
I've told you many a times before in the past, and I've shared it with our audience here, but my biggest fear in life is, ironically or unironically, death. And that ties a lot to my experiences with death. I've lost a lot of people that I care about, love. My life trajectory has been dramatically altered because of death. And I find myself contemplating death as this big unknown. And I've always viewed it as this nebulous concept that the only people who ever know the answer to it are the ones who experience it. So that's my biggest fear in life. But I understand that there are a lot of people who have flipped the script on that. Am I right?
absolutely. The book I listen to most often is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because I know that the purpose of this life is for me to die. The only thing I have to do is die. Everything else is optional. I don't have to breathe if I don't want to. I don't have to do my taxes. There are going to be some consequences if I quit doing those things,
Hmm.
but that's even one thing that's given me a lot of peace lately is I'm going to die. I'm not going to have these worries and these stresses and these issues forever. One day they will cease. And in order to kind of discuss and develop this concept, because reading the words only does so much, we have brought back my teacher, my brother, myself, Mr. Ryan Higginson.
Mm. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome back to the show, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored. This is one of my very favorite topics to talk about because I see so many people that are kind of stuck in the concept of death, and a lot of people have a lot of fear around it and hold a lot of trauma around it. So, there can be a huge amount of healing that can happen just through the understanding of death and working with our perspective of death. And one thing before we start, I want to kind of bring back, we talked last time about the concept of heart-brain coherence. And this is really apropos with this conversation because a lot of people have been taught certain things about death or have constructed certain thoughts about death that might not necessarily be constructive. So in the concept of heart-brain coherence, if you can tap into your feeling about the conversation and if it feels right to you, rather than just your knowledge about it. So kind of put the knowledge to the side for a bit and just feel into if these concepts feel right to you, right? And then if they do, then start to explore those at a deeper level and maybe allow these concepts, if they seem way out there, just to plant a seed as a potential. I want to start with, a lot of people kind of think if you haven't experienced death, who are you to talk about death? But I want to talk about why I do have a lot of experience with death. Not only the experience of death, but the leading up to and the time after, the energy of it. I look at energy, at everything through the eyes of what's energetically happening. I always have throughout my life. And when I was a kid, I had a sister who had gotten cancer. And, it was quite an experience. It was a bone cancer. She had to have a leg amputated. She had to go through chemotherapy and lose her hair and all of this. And she always had an incredible power around it. Like she wouldn't let anything get her down. She had my dad like rig her bike so that she could pedal with just one leg, so she could still ride around. And it was beautiful to watch, like, even in the face of this thing she was up against, to see how she dealt with it, this power that she had. And it kind of, showed her power, right? To go through that
Right.
kind of an experience, you're faced with it. Do you have power or not? Are you going to lay down, or are you going to work with it? And it was beautiful to watch. She died. It was interesting. One thing when after she had her leg amputated, she talked about how she could still feel her leg. And it drove her nuts because she'd have an itch in her leg that she couldn't scratch, right?
Yeah.
And that was wild to me. I remember as a little kid, but
that phantom limb
that
syndrome.
phantom leg. Yeah, phantom limb syndrome. So she died when she was 15. I was 9. And, our family's concept of death was, it became kind of traumatic, right? And, my parents didn't really want to talk much about it. I remember when she was about to die, my parents called our family into a family meeting without my sister there and let us know that she was going to die. And I didn't believe them. I'm like, that's not going to happen, because I'd never experienced death. It was, it was outside my realm.
Yeah.
And then one morning I was jumping on the trampoline and both my parents came out and, came out together. They were really solemn and they said, they came to me and said, your sister died last night. And then they just turned around and walked into the house and left me there to process it on my own. And I didn't know what to think of it. I felt betrayed. Like, how could that happen? Right.
Yeah.
And then years later, I have a brother who, all through his life, he had pretty bad depression and severe addiction that fed his depression and bad circadian rhythms. He worked graveyard shifts his whole life, and that can be a cause of depression.
Yeah.
And he committed suicide about 7 or 8 years ago. And then I have my dad died of cancer when I was 23. And then my mom died of cancer when I was 36. And that was a long drawn out thing with my mom. It was my siblings and I all helped take care of her. We would take shifts and stay with her at her house, take care of her. And it was a year and a half or so leading up to her passing. But it was really interesting. She also found her power. She fell one time while she was toward the end and she broke her arm, had to go to the hospital and get that work done. And driving her home, as we were driving home, she looks at me and she goes, "This is where the tough just have to get tougher."
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that was awesome. Instead of just like that same like feeling that her daughter had of just strength in it,
Yeah.
But what was interesting is 6 months before she passed, she said, "Ryan, will you be in charge of me at the end?" And I said, "Sure, Mom, I'll be in charge." And I didn't really know what that meant, right? She had already signed like the do not resuscitate, all the legal forms and all this, and her financial things were all done. So, but she also knew that I was really in tune with her. I'd worked with her quite a bit and healed some things in her body. So on Mother's Day, my two sisters live up in Evanston. On Mother's Day, my sisters took her up there to give her a little change of scenery. And I guess my sister said that while she was up there, something went wrong and she like groaned and leaned back in her chair and her eyes rolled up in her head. And then after that, she was in really rough shape. So they brought her back down to Salt Lake and to her house. And my sister called me and said, "Hey, Ryan, you might want to come over. Mom's not doing so well." So I drove over there. And like I mentioned last time, I'm an empath. I can feel the energy of not just people, but of space. And I walked into the house and it just felt like the energy of just chaos. And it was pretty gnarly when I walked in the front door and I walk into the living room and my brother couldn't even handle being in the same room with her. He was in the living room just sitting. And I walked down the hall into her bedroom and she had one of those hospital beds with the rails on it. And my other brother was in there and he didn't quite know what to do. And his his wife was in there too. And she was crying. And my mom was kind of sitting halfway up in the bed, just like white knuckling the rails and just fighting. She was just like, and it was chaotic. It was pretty gnarly energy. And it was really interesting when I walked into the room. It's like spirit just took over for me. It's almost like I watched myself work from the outside, and I just didn't have to think about anything. It was just natural. And I went and knelt down next to her, and I put my hand on hers, and I said, "Hey, Mom." And she couldn't really focus on much, but she kind of leaned toward me and realized it was me. And she couldn't really talk very well either, but she mumbled. She goes, "Oh, are you leaving?" And I said, "No, I just got here." And I said, "But it's time for you to go." And it's such a beautiful experience. And she goes, "Really?" And I go, "Yeah." I said, You've done all the suffering you need to do. No more suffering for this life. You've done everything you need to do, and we all support you in this. And it's time for you to go be with your Father in heaven. You know, she's religious, and so put it in her terms, go be with your Father in heaven, go be with Connie, which is her daughter who had passed. And she let go of the rails and let go of that frantic breathing. And then, you know, she couldn't really focus on anything. And then all of a sudden there was this moment of just complete clarity with her. And she looked over to the side of the bed where there was no one physically standing, but there was someone there. And she looked there and she just relaxed. And then she looked up at the ceiling the same way with this intense clarity. And then she just laid back and relaxed. And I put one hand on top of her head and one hand on her heart and just held her energetically. And I just slowly drew, like started to pull energy upwards, because the spirit exits the crown as it leaves the body. And I had one hand on her crown drawing and one hand on her heart holding, and I could feel, and then she let go of her last breath, and her last breath exited, and then she didn't breathe anymore. And I could feel her heartbeat just slowly peter out. You think of death as like, oh, and they're done. No, it's like a petering out if it's that circumstance, right? And it's a slow draw of the energy moving through. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes it's a quick death that, you know, the energy shoots out. But for her, it was a slow draw. And with one hand on her heart and one hand on her head, because my hand was on her head and I was so connected with her, I could feel, because I'm really in tune to energy, I could feel her energy leave her body and actually came into my body for just a minute or two. And physically, it felt like I drank a gallon of coffee. You know, it's like double the energy in my field. And I could feel her within me. And then she exited my body. And then, you know, I really understood that the energy system is the soul of the body, and her energy was out of her body. And then it wasn't her anymore, just a shell. Right. And I talked with my siblings for a little while, and then I went home, and my two kids shared a room, and my daughter had a really special relationship with my mom, and my son did too, but especially my daughter. My mom would take her once a week and spend the day with her, and they were asleep. It was like 2 a.m, and I sat down on my daughter's bed, and I said, "Grammy did it," and they were still asleep. But when I said that, I felt my mom's energy come into the room. I felt her spirit come into the room. And it was like this energy of thank you, right? And you know, she was like whole, and the energy of going through that really felt similar to the energy of when my kids were born. You know, it's like a birth into the next phase, and such a beautiful experience.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That is incredibly powerful. I had truth bumps, as you say, at several points throughout that. And one of the statements that I've been trying to wrap my head around from last time was when you said that if you had cancer, you would love it and be grateful for it, and, you know, that it was going to teach you something. And cancer has taken most of the people from my life. My dad currently has cancer. My mother just lost one of her best friends to cancer. One of my great friends who I play D&D with has cancer, which they thought was pretty minuscule, and now they're finding it, and he's really having a hard time. So I kind of naturally had some resentments around that, because, like, how can you say you would love cancer when it's so awful? But you've really put it in another light. You lost your sister, your father, your mother to cancer, but you transcended the hate and the resentment to realizing that it's whatever happens is part of the journey, and that one day we will be done suffering and it's time to move.
Yeah.
So thank you for providing additional context to that, because that helped crack my shell.
Yeah. You know, and the healing of cancer, like I said, I look at everything on the energetic level, and cancer at its core is physically a mitochondrial issue. That's typically the beginnings of cancer, a mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's why so many people, a lot of the pollutants and toxins in our environment are causing mitochondrial issues and seed oils and things like that. And so the mitochondria don't have the energy and the space to do their work, so they get bound down and they get distorted, and then becomes a cancerous problem. Deeper to that, though, cancer is a problem of holding. Many people, there are many people who have had advanced stages of cancer who have forgiven someone who transgressed them, and like really forgiven and let go of that holding, and then their cancer was healed. So for me, to really take a look at cancer, we want to shine the light on where it is that we might have holding in our spiritual body, in our light body. And so it's not like people who have cancer there's anything wrong with them. We all have holding, right? We all have things to work on, and it's just for some people it manifests into a cancerous thing. But we all have that. We all have these things to work on, and so it's like you look into yourself and really contemplate, what am I holding? What am I holding on to? Do I have anger towards something? Do I feel trauma towards something? Do I feel resentment towards something? Do I feel fear about something? And you start to shine the light on that. Cancer likes to hide in the darkness. So we shine the light on that and heal those things. And you start with the energetic path of healing, which is the foundation to all healing. So I think part of the, we, in our culture, we deal with cancer with, a lot of it's chemicals, right? But there's a spiritual path to working with cancer too. And if you can heal those underlying holdings, it can cure cancer and it can transform that. And there's also kind of the concept that, and I have this in my notes for later on, but we can go into it, is that the soul is meant to exit the body at a certain point. And maybe that's the path that it's meant to do that with, so that's something to honor as well. It's not like someone who dies of cancer lost the battle. It's that, if they pass from cancer, then that's what's written in their path, right?
Before we get into that topic too deeply, Ryan, I want to make sure I word this the proper way, but I'm also going to try and approach this in an unfiltered concept.
Yeah.
First of all, your story about your mother was heart-wrenching, absolutely heart-wrenching. And I think in a way I was feeling a little jealous. Maybe, I don't think resentful would be the right word. I think jealous would probably fit properly, because I feel like a lot of my beliefs, right? Like I do have a spirituality side in my belief system, but it's based completely off of the amount of belief that I can muster into it, right? I've never had a profound experience like you have, talking about how you could feel your mother's energy and things. I think resentful might be a proper word, maybe jealousy into resentful, just because like that's, you're so confident and you're so sure of that feeling. And in a way, like, it just kind of sucks, because like with all the experiences I've had with death, I've never felt like I've had a bit of closure like that before. So in a way, I find it very inspiring how thoroughly, like, and fully you have this belief in this energy and in this spirit and soul.
Yeah.
And then in another way, I just find myself wishing that I could fully believe in something to that effect. I just really wanted to get that off my chest. I felt like I needed to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Most people don't have a beautiful experience like that with death, right? And
Yeah.
to me, I look at it in the way that what we experience is what we're meant to experience. So for me, I was meant to have that experience. It was obvious for me and for my mom, so that I would be able to speak to it and show people like the potential of a beautiful death. And yeah, it was gnarly leading up to it, right? I mean, the cancer got into her brain
Yeah.
and she couldn't really think straight. And it was kind of funny sometimes, like she picked up the telephone and said, "We can both brush our teeth with this." And and then one time I was putting her to bed and she said, "Hey, Ryan, will you lock the kitchen cabinets?" Like, she thought we had to lock all the kitchen cabinets every night. And one time I was helping her go to the bathroom and she pooped and we flushed it and she looked down in the toilet and she's like, "Where does that go? Do we have to put it in a bag and put it in the trash?" And, it's things like that it was just like, the lead up and I just kind of explained things to her and worked with it. But the lead up was pretty gnarly. Like when she broke
Yeah.
her arm and, we all had to hold like a layer of strength with it. So that moment of death though was gnarly too for the while leading up to it. But when it actually happened, it was a birth. It was the most beautiful experience. And I get emotional over it, not because I hold trauma over it, because it was such a sacred experience for me,
Yeah.
and one of the best experiences of my life. But I like to share that story because I had a client she came in and she was in really rough shape because her grandpa was about to die and she was really close to her grandpa. And she was like, terrified of him having to pass and really distraught about it. And I told her that story and she came to me a few weeks later and that story just totally inspired her. And it was leading, right, perfect timing. Like it was a week or two before I think it was a week before her grandfather died. And she was the only one there. She was the one watching him at his death. And rather than being terrified or going through this trauma as he passed, she laid down on the bed and snuggled him and just stroked his hair and just like held him like the way that I held my mom and had this beautiful experience with, and like celebrated her grandfather leaving. And so for me, I think I was shown that experience so that I could teach, with having that experience, like teach the potential for holding the right energy around death. And, it's, we'll go into this in a little bit, but when we talk about how our culture thinks about death, and there's different layers of potential, for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a story from my childhood?
Yeah. I love that.
So my father passed away when I was 8. As a kid, as an adult, I look back on my father in a different light. But as a kid, I loved my father more than anything in this world, right?
Yeah.
I remember the day he died. I remember the sequence of events leading up to getting home and finding out, the police car in front of our house and everything that happened afterwards. And I remember that night when I went to sleep, and the dream I had was, it was my brother and I. My brother was in his bedroom. Well, we had a shared bedroom, but in the dream, my brother was in our shared bedroom crying, and I was in my dad's room on his bed crying. And I remember in the dream just being very upset. And all of a sudden, we heard our front door to our house open, and we heard my father shout, or not shout, but he was like, "Hey, I'm home." And I remember in the dream getting up out of the bed and very excited and running into the living room to go see him. And there was just this bright light. And I woke up. And almost all of my experiences with death, I've always had some kind of dream to that effect about the person who passed away. I remember we had a person, he wasn't our actual grandpa, but we treated him like our grandpa. We called him Grandpa Bob. He lived down the street and he kind of filled in for a father role after my dad had passed away. Well, a couple years later, he was an older man, but so a couple years later, he ends up passing away. And I remember having a dream that night as well. And in the dream, I was outside in our backyard, just mourning the loss of him and just being depressed in my dream. And I remember him walking in looking younger. And I said, "Bob, what are you doing here? Like, you're gone." And he goes, "Yeah, I know. I just wanted to say goodbye to y'all real quick." He kind of had a little bit of a country draw to him. And growing up, I'd always had that belief that like there is something else there, right? Because these dreams I'm having, they feel like legitimately somebody saying goodbye. Until 2018, when my best friend died. And I never got a dream like that for him.
Mm.
All I ever got were nightmares. And it really brought that into question for me. And I think that was a huge spiritual like wall I had built up around that. Because then I started questioning like maybe those were just my brain reacting to death. And then depending on how traumatic the death is, my brain reacts in these nightmares that I get now. But yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah. I think, it's pretty interesting for your dad to say I'm home. It doesn't mean I'm home walking into your house. He means I'm home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
he was a heavily spiritual man. So home to us back then meant heaven,
Back to source.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As far as the nightmares, I think, when we go into a dream state, we also, it's a way for our brain to process things. I don't know if you notice if you're like watching a genre of a certain video or something right before you go to sleep, and then you have dreams about it, like your brain continues to process it. And
yeah,
with your friend's passing, I think there was a lot of the energy of trauma to process for your brain. But I do also know that dreams can be a little bit of a sort of a lifting of the veil. So it's like doesn't surprise me that your dad would come to you and say, I'm home, and that Grandpa Bob kind of had, just wanted to come and touch base with you one time. But there's two sides to that, right? The processing of your brain needs to like work through things, and in the subconscious sleep state, that's a process for it. And I had kind of a similar one. I had a client that I worked on every 2 weeks for 18 years. I started working on it when he was 70, and he died at 89 of lung cancer. And
oh my God,
when he was
again.
Yeah, cancer again. Yeah. And he'd come in toward the end with his oxygen tank, and walk in. He was so funny. I loved this guy. His name was Joe. And he would, I share an office with a bunch of different practitioners and people in the waiting room. He'd walk in the front door and yell, "Is the doctor in?" But he, I called him because he stopped coming in. He couldn't make it in anymore, right? And so after I hadn't seen him for maybe 4 months, I called him just to check in and see how he was doing. And I knew he was like getting pretty close to death, so I just wanted to touch base with him. And he said, "Yeah, I can't really go out of the house anymore. I'd love to come see you, but I'm going to come see you soon," is how he put it. And I was a little bit like, "You going to come see me soon?" And then I found out, and then I had a really vivid dream, probably a month after that. And I had a dream that he had invited me into this big castle, and he had like people who were serving him that just loved him, and like not service like slaves, but service as like just as like group of people that just loved him. And he had like this throne, and he invited me to sit up there next to his throne, and we're talking. And then I found out the next week from one of my other clients that he had passed right before I had that dream. And I'm like, oh, that's how he was coming to see me, right? And he made it a point to. So yeah, I think your dad made it a point to come and see you, and Grandpa Bob did too, But it's not that, death is, it's like these bodies we have are merely a vehicle for us to experience this third dimension we're in. It's almost like a car, right? Mm-hmm. And eventually, if you have a lease on your car, it's time to turn the car in and you're done with it. But, a lot of people think our bodies are it. And then, we lose our body and we've lost everything and that's the end. But all it is you're stepping out of that tool. Your body is a tool to experience this dimension, but you're still there, right? You're stepping into another dimension. And the people who are the most, like I say, in tune to nature and the rhythms of things, like the Aborigines, they say that we're in the dream state right now. and that when you pass, you go home. You go home to the real state, and all we're doing in these bodies is having this experience, and with the goal of progressing our consciousness, and that's really the purpose that that we're here to have all these experiences. And so for me, every experience that we have is for your benefit, and the harder ones, like I said last time, are the ones to have the most gratitude for, because that's where the deepening happens. Yeah,
The deepening.
the deepening of the consciousness, right?
It's deep. It's Marianas Trench deep sometimes.
Yeah. So, birth is really, or death is just a birth into another dimension, and we don't lose contact with those that are on the other side. We have full access to them, and in fact, some people will die right as a child is born, so that they can be a guide for them throughout their life, on the other side, and have full access to them. If your grandma is here in this life, you might be able to talk to her, every once in a while, or go see her, and you have that much contact with her. If she's passed, she has full access to you all the time to whisper intuitive things into your field and help guide you. And some people pass at a certain point in their path so that they can be helpful to the upcoming generations, as like guide elders. So like I said last time, you're not your body, you're not your emotions, you're not your mind, but you are your soul, and your soul is your higher self, right? So you can ask your soul for guidance, and your soul has complete access. Oh, I've got my buddy coming up here.
He needed to come show his face.
You have complete access to the person on the other side. I have a mentor who taught me a modality of body work, and he comes to me all the time while I'm doing body work. And my dad, on Father's Day, I bought a harmonica for him. He had passed when I was 23, so just like a few years ago, I bought a harmonica. I'd never played the harmonica before, but he loved to play the harmonica. So to honor him, I bought a harmonica, and I went to the store, and they're showing me the cheap ones. I'm like, what's the best one you have? And the guy's like, oh, you'll never have to upgrade. And I wanted to honor my dad with the best harmonica. And then I invited him to play through me. And the first time I picked it up and play, I knew how to play it. I'm really good at the harmonica, and I've never blown my entire life. I was at a ceremony, plant medicine ceremony with my wife, and before we started the ceremony, we were in Costa Rica, and I swam in the river, and I sat in the river, and I spoke with my dad. I invited him to come and play the harmonica through me in ceremony. And during the ceremony, I played the harmonica. I didn't tell anyone that I communed with my dad in the river. Played the harmonica and masterfully. And I'm just, and it's not like I practice. I hardly ever play the harmonica, but just masterfully played it. And I sat down after, and my wife leans over and she goes, I could feel your dad coming through, and so I was talking last time about, when you have a thought, you send out a frequency, right? So when you think about someone who's passed, you send out a frequency, and you commune with them, and you can ask them questions, you can heal things. Just because they've passed out of this body doesn't mean that you've lost your connection with them. So if you have problems with each other, you can tap in with them, and you can forgive, and you can be forgiven, and you can continue the connection and the healing process. But it just takes knowing that, thinking about them, and being open to what you feel coming back. It's not a word conversation, it's a feeling conversation. So, you might honor your loved ones who have passed by just sitting in meditation and think deeply, pinpointed about them. When my brother passed, they cremated him, and we do a camping trip in the Tetons every year, and he loved to do this camping trip. And we were going to spread his ashes at his favorite place called Signal Mountain up in Teton National Park. And so we had our family and some of his daughter and some of the friends around. And we go up there, and my oldest, I'm the youngest of 7, so my oldest sibling and one of my brothers, I heard them talking, and they felt like they needed to be like to facilitate this thing, but they're like, I don't know what to do. I've never done this before. I heard them talking.
Yeah.
And I felt my brother come to me and ask me to facilitate this. I felt his energy. So I circled everyone up, and my sister had found a feather on her property up in Evanston that she gave to my daughter. And I asked my daughter if we could use this feather. And I had each person hold the feather and talk about stories of Gary. Gary was a beautiful person. He was hilarious, for one thing, one of the funniest people you ever meet. And that was kind of the counterbalance to his depression, right? It's interesting to watch how he moved through life. That's how he dealt with his depression. But we told stories about Gary one at a time, and I could feel the energy of Gary coming in like really strongly as we did it. And then I took his daughter, and we went to this grove of aspen trees, and we spread his ashes, and I sang an ikaro, or a song that's kind of a spiritual song to honor that. And then we finished, and I gave his daughter the feather to put with his urn, and then I felt him come to me again, just like my mom did, like, thank you, right? So a lot of people hold trauma around death because they feel like they've lost their connection with the loved one. But these bodies we have are just one layer of connection, and there's a much deeper connection that's spiritual and energetic, and we haven't lost that. So we're always there with us, and the more you understand that, the more you tune into that, the deeper the connection, because you're going there, right? You're making that connection. If you don't believe in that or even understand that, you're not going to be reaching out to make a connection. In fact, you might be thinking about that person from a place of trauma rather than a place of like, let's connect and let's celebrate, right?
Yeah. So my guidebook that I've been looking into for direction, I suppose, says that people shouldn't be weeping and wailing and lamenting by the body because it confuses the spirit that needs to ascend, or the word you said is pass. And I think that's a really lovely word because, in education, when you pass, you've attained.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
So I think it is incredibly important for people to be able to take away that the way we help those we love transit the between is by love and by serving. We've talked
Yes.
about serving and gratitude being the highest vibration.
Yeah.
And if we're weeping and wailing, we're kind of like pulling the energy out of the system. Whereas if you love and serve, and like whenever a close friend of mine passes, when I'm talking to our friends, I'll say, okay, cool. What are the lessons that this person left you with? Because that's your charge now. That's who
Yeah.
you have to be.
Yeah.
So I find it incredibly beautiful that you have such a deep connection to Source, that you feel that gratitude once you've done these works for the people that are in the transition.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
What I'm really interested in, Ryan, and I think a lot of our viewers might be interested as well, as a beginner, completely spiritually flat, a person who's not so in tune with themselves or anything along those lines, or even the world around them, what would be a great starting point for us to be able to try and create that connection? I know we have to find, the idea of love and gratitude, but where do we start with that?
Well, I think a really good place to start is to learn to calm the mind. So meditation. And for me, if I really want to honor an ancestor or really tap in, I'll light a candle, and then I'll stare into the candle and I'll think about that person, like really think about that person, not from a place of what sort of, if you feel trauma from their passing, not from that place, but from a place of the love you feel for them, right? Like, remember the experiences you had that were just beautiful with that person. So that sounds like a vibration of just like love and connection toward the person, and then go into meditation and just be open to the feelings, because you have to get out of your head. You have to get out of your thinking mind and get into your feeling mind, right? And just and trust that those feelings that come through are real. They're not just a construct of your head, right? And that's the tricky part, I think. A lot of people, when they make connection with the other side, they're just like, well, that's just whatever my monkey brain is coming up with that I want to, right?
Yeah.
And you look into the world of like shamanism, and these medicine men and women, like real advanced shamans, they make full connection, and it feels like sort of like dreaming up the connection in a way, but you have to get past the questioning of it and really understand that this is a true connection and buy into that rather than questioning it. And the more that you trust that and blend with that energy, the stronger it becomes. It comes through, because you can imagine questioning. Say if you made a phone call to someone and then you question, am I actually talking to this person, or is this some AI thing that I'm doing? Right? What kind of you have that question that creates a barrier there, right? But if you have like this full, like deep, pinpointed, intentional connection and thinking about the person, and I think thinking thoughts about the person starts to bring their energy towards you, right? That's what I experienced when we scattered my brother's ashes. He was there strong with us. And I actually saw him, like, it was weird. I paddleboarded across the lake, and he loved to like hang out at the beach with all of us. And I was paddleboarding back. And this sounds really strange, but I actually saw him on the beach as I was paddleboarding back. And I was confused. I'm like, is that Gary? And I was like, oh, wow. He's like there strong enough that I could see his energy. And that, I've never had that happen ever again before or after that. But just like honoring the person and honoring the beauty about them. I love what you said, Aaron, about like taking what it is that they taught you and continue to move that through. That's like the blessing. And that's a way to honor the person that's passing. I think it's really important to honor. So when you say that you shouldn't like wail and deep grieving around someone who's passed, it's like when they say it confuses the soul. You can imagine if you had just passed and you're heading to the light or the next dimension, right? And you have all your loved ones back there just like so distraught and so traumatized, you're going to be torn. Can I really step into my next phase, or I need to take care of these people? They're like in a rough place, right? So the way to really honor someone who's passed, feel the emotion of grief, right? There's yin and yang of everything. So don't discount that emotion of grief. If it comes to you, feel it fully, but don't get stuck. Don't transform that into trauma. You just feel that emotion of grief, really work it through. Don't stifle it. When my mom passed, we had a funeral, and after everyone left, I knelt down in front of the casket and I felt this grief, and I put my head and hands on the floor and honored her, and then sat up, and I just like full on bawled, like just bawled, and my shirt was soaked with tears and snot, and I was just like, I did wail, right? But only for about an hour, enough time to allow the full effect of grief to work its way through my field. And then I sat up, and I just like, from then on, full celebration. And, for some people, grief comes in waves, right? If you haven't worked through it, it's going to keep coming in waves. And that's another way to work through it. But it's good to honor that. But also look at the light side of the yin and yang in death. And it's important to just celebrate their lessons, like you said, Aaron, their lessons that they taught you, and take those on and progress with those. I have a client that I just worked on for the first time on Saturday, and he's doing this run, not just across the country, but to every capital. So he's zigzagging through the entire 48 states.
Wow.
Yeah, he's doing this.
Damn.
And he's on, he was here over the weekend. It was his 16th capital. He still has a long way to go. And he's doing it in honor of his daughter, who had died 7 years ago. and he's put together his wife and his family are supporting him, and he's put together this movement of like honoring death. So it's Survivor, SRVIVR, survivor.org. And and he talked about, because we were talking about death, and I said, death is as much something to celebrate as it is something to mourn, right? But the
Right.
trick is you don't turn the mourning and the grief into trauma. That's where it becomes counterproductive, and that's where the holding starts to happen. But he'd made a good point. He's like, if you pass, how do you want your family to perceive your death? Do you want them to feel traumatized, or do you want them to celebrate and be inspired, right? How would you really want your family and friends, your loved ones, to perceive your death? And are you perceiving your loved one's death in the way that you would want them to perceive your death, right? That's a really beautiful way to look at it. Yeah, you want your loved ones to celebrate, man, to like gain something from this experience and to make something of it, because there's a lot of energy around death. You can't discount that. So what do you do with that energy? You can either spin it into a trauma, or you can spin that in a benevolent spiral into something beautiful, right? You can turn it into spirituality. Death can make you start to contemplate it. Oh, I just lost my parent. Where did they go? What's going on now? But yeah, that's one thing that our culture has a little bit of a hard time with, is the celebration of death. I'd say the majority of our culture. So a lot of people are terrified of death. And, in other cultures, there's the concept of a good death, like it's an honor to die for a cause.
Or to just die well.
Or to die well. Yeah. Yeah.
Just die well. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, a lot of people are terrified of the experience of death itself. But that's just a construct in your mind. You have no idea how you're going to die. So why have all this fear around it, and view it as all it is a fleeting experience? That's all that death is. For my mom, the fleeting experience was 1.5 years of dealing with cancer. But in the big scope of things, that's a really small slice of time in the scope of the path of her entire soul. Other people, it's a car wreck, fleeting experience of just a moment. That's how my friend who's doing the survivor thing, that's how he lost his daughter. So it was just instant, right? I have a client who traveled all over the world, this really beautiful man, and he got home from a trip in Europe, and he was super healthy and everything's great, and got up to use the bathroom and died on the toilet just real quick. But to live our life with this fear of this upcoming thing, you're like making a construct that's not really true. I think Mark Twain paraphrases, he said, most people live their lives in fear of something that never transpires, right?
So I feel called out.
Yeah.
I feel called out by that.
So we make this construct of, what are you imagining death is going to look like? I really love, there's this book called Good Energy by Casey Means, and she said, Yogananda, Rumi, Kahlil Gibran, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Lao Tzu, and Thich Nhat Hanh all implore us to examine death and trust it's natural and not to be feared. So all these spiritual masters who are like, have a much deeper understanding than most of us, they're like, contemplate your death. Don't be fearful of your death, and know that it's natural and not something to be feared, something to be excited about. I'm actually very excited for the time that I get to pass, and I'm in no rush. I have a lot to do in this life, but it's to me, it's going to be a very exciting moment, no matter what the circumstances. And so if you go through life with that sort of mentality, you deconstruct the fear of death, and you turn that into excitement rather than fear.
Yeah.
I feel like it's easier said than done for a lot of people,
All things,
and I'm
yes.
not necessarily, yeah, like pretty much everything in life, easier said than done.
Yeah.
So I guess from your point of view, Ryan, how do you think somebody could start that process? I mean, coming to terms with one's own death and mortality, and then also being able to process death in a way that doesn't turn it into a trauma. These are things that to me sound very complex, but that's because my relationship with death is so, like, in a way, I feel like I'm
Has been
twisted in a
traumatic.
pretzel. It has been, yeah. I feel like I'm twisted over and over and over, and
Yeah.
untwisting these it's difficult. I've done this for 31 years now. Well, give or take a couple of years from my first experience of death to current, but, taking the way I view these things and untwisting it and becoming less trauma focused and more celebration. Like, where do you think a good place to start would be with that?
Well, to begin, I had a client that I was working on. We started to talk about death, and she said that when she was a little kid, she started to ask her parents about the concept of death. And her dad goes, "We don't talk about that." That was the end of the conversation. So for a lot of people, it's like even thinking about the concept of death is too much to go to, right?
Yeah, it's just a wall.
So I think the beginning of it is to open yourself up to, like consciously say, okay, I'm going to die one day. So start to contemplate on what you think about that and how you think about that. Okay. So yeah, I am going to die. But what are my thoughts about that? Right. Is that a negative thing or a positive thing? And I've done a lot of research on near-death experiences where people had died, pronounced dead and came back, right? And man, a lot of those people don't want to come back because it's so beautiful on the other side. So you start to look at that. They say that there's one called Dying to Be Me, this woman who died of cancer. She was proclaimed dead. She went to the other side. She communed with her dad, who had been dead had passed for 10 years, right? And she explains how beautiful the other side is, right? Like going home. And she gave the example. She said, if I remember right, it's been a lot of years since I read the book, but she said something along the lines of, picture like there's this warehouse that has every single thing that's ever been created in it, every sunset, every rainbow, every forest, every waterfall, all the beauty of everything. And she said, when we're alive, we get to look at everything with this little pin flashlight, right? she, said, she said, when you die,
Yeah.
it's like all the lights come on and you get to see everything. And they talk about how colors are much more vivid and like the feelings of everything and this feeling of just peace and being home. And so, if you have a lot of fear of death, maybe start to do a little research on people who have had that experience and came back. And a lot of people are told by their loved one that they have more work to do in this life, so they choose to come back, but they don't want to because it's so beautiful on the other side. There's also this concept that I've understood that our minds are so powerful, we create a reality on our death. And so if you die and you expect to see something, there was a book Wayne Dyer wrote. He went around and interviewed all these people who had all these near-death experiences from all these different cultures, different religions, different cultures, different areas of the world. And they all, at the moment of their death, experience what they expect to experience. So if you expect to see Jesus, you see Jesus. If you expect to go to hell, you go to hell. If you expect to, but it's only a fleeting thing. And then you understand, you come out of it, and then you're not in hell indefinitely, like what some people espouse. But it's like, oh, my mind constructed that, so that's what I experienced right out of the gate. But there are common things that you see from a lot of these different near-death experiences where there's like a dark tunnel with a light at the end, and you go toward the light, and then you experience this light energy. There's also the concept of a life review. So one thing that if you're going to be terrified about death, the only thing to me to be terrified about is if you haven't lived a good life, you're going to have to confront yourself. So think about, did I live my potential? And one guy he talked about in his life review, he saw how he affected people from their perspective. And he gave the story. He said that in his life, he had an experience where he was driving down the road and this drunk guy came stumbling out into the road and the guy slammed on his brakes and the drunk guy yelled at him. And then the guy in the truck got out and just beat the hell out of him, beat him unconscious. And then in his life review, he saw from the guy's perspective, the guy had just lost his wife and had spent the day at the bar numbing himself and came out and stumbled into the road. And if the guy had had some compassion and saw it, from a broader perspective, he would have given the guy a big hug instead of beating him unconscious, right? So to me, it's like the way that we live our lives is like of utmost importance, man. It's where we go. You commune with the beings that match your vibration after you pass. So what's your vibration?
That just reminded me of a book that I read years and years ago, and I still love this book to this day. And so it's called The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Abom, I think. So the book follows this guy, and it starts with his death. And it's exactly what the title suggests. He meets 5 people in heaven. And what I loved about the book is because the people he sees in heaven are not necessarily the people you would think. Like you would think mom, dad, brother, so on and so forth. People who've had massive impacts on your life, or you've had a massive impact on their life. For him, what it was is there were some people that he didn't even realize he ever met. In fact, it was like your story of the drunk guy getting out of the car and getting beat up. That reminded me of it because there's a story. One of the people he meets in heaven is a person he never actually met. But what happened is when he was a kid, he had chased a ball out in the middle of the street, and a car swerved to miss the kid, and the car crashed, and the driver died. And he met the driver of that car, and the driver told him that he is dead because of him from when he was a kid. And oh my God, it's such a beautiful story. I mean, obviously, it's a completely fictitious story written, but it did give me a perspective shift on how I view the people around me, whether it's a major impact or a small impact. Whether it's a fleeting moment and all I did was say hi to somebody as I walked by them on the street, that could have been the moment. That could have been the one thing that person remembered for months.
Yeah.
Like somebody said hi to me. Like they were nice to me. And today was the worst day of my life, but that smile changed my day.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend to all the listeners to go check it out. It's a pretty short book. I don't think it's a lot of pages, maybe 140 pages or something.
And they've made a movie about it.
Yeah, the movie is I recommend the book. I recommend the book dramatically, but the movie is also it is an adaptation that does, I believe, follow the book pretty well. But yeah, no, it's incredible how you're describing that, Ryan, because it, like the life review concept. I know that was in like the ancient Egyptians mythology with, their heart would be weighed
against a feather.
And if it was, against a feather, and if they're like, and things of that nature. And you're 100% right. Like what would your life review be?
Yeah. Would you be proud of your life review? It's like, I flipped that guy off in traffic. I've got a little something.
You go, guy. I hope you make it there fast.
Or,
buddy.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah. It's like little things, like every single moment we get to, we're coloring our life review, and to me, there's not anything more important than that. And so, how do we affect people? How do we affect the people around us? Are we positive impact or a negative impact? And how big of an impact can we make? Are we living to our full potential, And, to me, that's how I live my life. It's like, because, all this other stuff around us that we accumulate those go away in an instant.
I feel called out with my corner. My corner of stuff back there. I love my stuff.
Well, I mean, it's great to have stuff and to do the things, but also to prioritize. Like, what's really important is how we commune with other people and how we affect other people, and the imprint that we live, that we leave with other people, and the legacy that we. I love what Aaron said again about take what they taught you and run with it, right?
Yeah.
And if I taught someone to hate, they run with that. That's not a beautiful thing. If I taught someone to love, and it reverberates out, right? There's always a reverberation, no matter what the energy is that you exhibit. Yeah. So if you're going to be terrified about death, if you're not living the right life, be terrified about your life review, and make some pivots,
I honestly, whenever I'm finally out of the military and Aaron and I are back in the same area, I think him and I talked about this last time too, after we got done recording with you, Ryan, but we both really want to come and see you.
Yeah, that'd
we
be
just want to
awesome.
go to Utah,
I'd love that.
come see you and go through one of your healing sessions and everything. Cause I feel like I got a lot of energies and I feel like I got a lot of weird blocks going on in my life.
I don't know if I have
probably
one
need a little bit
chakra
of help.
spinning. I
Well,
might have one.
there's some really powerful tools to move some things through with plant medicines. It's you do some research on that, and you see massive healings with people on all different levels. And those plant medicines are a higher consciousness, that we're tuning into, communing with, and they'll teach us. Sometimes they show you the shadow that you don't want to see, and you get to sit with it and then heal that. They shine the light on the things.
Yeah.
And but there's all kinds of tools. Meditation is an incredible tool. Breath work is there's all kinds of different tools that we have. Yeah, I do. There's one other thing that I wanted to bring up about the perception of fear around death, right? So someone who holds like fear around death, or it's a suffering. And I was listening to a monk talk about the difference between pain and suffering. And I really love the way he put it. He said, pain is the thing that causes the pain, right? Maybe you stub your toe and you feel the pain there or whatever, right? Suffering is your attachment to it. And, it's like death, the experience of death is really just a fleeting experience, but a lot of people suffer their whole life leading up to that one little fleeting experience that could be beautiful. Could be a beautiful experience. You have no idea. So why construct like a traumatic view of what you have no idea what it's going to be, right? Why not construct a beautiful view of what it's going to be? And if you're gonna construct a view about something in the future, construct beauty, and let go of the suffering, let go of the attachment of the fear. And again, like you said, it's easier said than done, right? Because a lot of these patterns are ingrained, right? So we have to kind of deconstruct these patterns. And you can't, like I said before, you can't let go of an emotion. You have to transmute that emotion.
Yeah.
So from fear to excitement. I have no fear about death. I have a lot of excitement about death. It's a difference. It's a different energy.
And that's a more powerful energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you imagine like living your whole life excited about the end, right?
Yeah.
And it's a choice. I have no idea what it's going to look like, but no matter what it looks like, I'm excited for it.
So if I may, I've got a couple of quick little things. Your remarks about suffering is your attachment to pain. I actually, within the last few months, checked out a study where they put monks and a control group of normal people in an MRI, and they had like their hand or their finger in this gom jabar, this pain box, that they would send a tone, and then there would be pain stimulus. For the normal people, the tone would go, the part of the brain responsible for dealing with pain would immediately light up, the pain would occur, and then that area of the brain would stay lit for quite some time. The more it happened, the longer it would stay on. The monks, the tone would go off and there'd be no activity. The pain would occur, there'd be some activity, and then when the pain was gone, brain went quiet again.
Yeah.
So if you're present in this moment, the only thing that's going to hurt is pain.
Yeah.
You're not going to build these triggers and this scar tissue that you talked about last time, where every time you hear the tone, you feel the pain.
Yeah.
And once the pain is over, you should be able to let that go. And that's going to differentiate pain and suffering in your life.
Yeah.
Damn.
I'll try and find that, but no promises.
Yeah, that's beautiful proof about that. I love that.
Yeah. And then I just want to share that my one experience with grandmother medicine, that was my key takeaway, was seeing how I was affecting other people's lives, how I was allowing my pain to overwhelm me, so that instead of taking pain from other people's lives and changing that into something brighter, I was allowing that pain to persist. And to be Franklin, to be Aaron, I still kind of am. Yeah, I still kind of am. I haven't really integrated that lesson into my life yet because I haven't passed.
It's easier
I'm
said
still
than
working
done.
on it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still easier said than done.
Yeah.
But
you never just learn
Yeah.
a lesson instantly, you know?
no,
Yeah.
especially not in my family.
Yeah.
We're lifetime learners.
I had an experience on the medicine where she showed me the space in between lives, right? And that's where she showed me that you commune with the beings that match your vibration. And I said, okay, so how do I get up to hang out with Christ and Buddha? Right? And she said 3 things. She said, 1, always hold a feeling of gratitude no matter the circumstance, no matter the situation. Always feel this feeling, generate this feeling of gratitude, highest vibration frequency. Number 2, always be of service, which is also, highest vibration. And then she said, number 3, she said, balance and amplify your energy system, which kind of surprised me. I'm like, my energy system? It's like, I go to do some acupuncture or something, But then 6 months later, she showed me that your energy system is your soul. And, we talked a little bit about that before, that when my mom passed, I could feel her soul leave her body as her energy left her body. And there's no difference between the two. And your energy system is your consciousness as well, So it's basically develop your consciousness into the highest vibration. Yeah.
In a way, I really want to thank you, Ryan, because I didn't mean to kind of turn you into like my own personal therapist there for
No,
a
I
good
love
majority of half the episode. But I did feel really called to kind of express these emotions with you.
Yeah.
And I think a part of that is because you are a person who wants to transmute those into something else. And yeah, I just really want to express my gratitude. Thank you so much for listening to me and Aaron as well, and helping us impart some wisdom to us and our listeners, because my relationship with death is not going to change overnight.
Right.
If I said that I was walking away from this conversation with a completely different view of death, I would be lying to you, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you're a genuine person, and you tell us how you're thinking. But I do want to say that I feel more empowered to change how I view death.
Yeah.
And I think I'm on a journey throughout my life, as we all are. We're all on our own journeys here. But I really want to look at my life review and not just be proud of like the life I've lived, but I want to look back and think about how I have affected others and say, that was what I wanted. That is what I've been aiming to do.
Yeah.
I want to be able to be like you, Ryan, and take people's emotions and transform it into something else. It's a lot of talk and a lot of words, but I'm going to boil it down to just thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
So listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. If you're like Tim, I'm so glad that you had this seed planted and watered by our good friend Ryan. There's more to come. There's a lot more to come. If you want to help us out, check out all our socials. Like, follow, subscribe, do all those things. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Leave a 5-star review after you hear an episode. We have Patreon where you can support us directly. And that'll help us get out to Salt Lake City to see Ryan after Tim gets out. Yay!
Heck yeah.
So
10
check
months
that
and
out.
counting, baby.
Yep. We
look
also have
forward to it.
shirts. We have shirts that the original version said shine your light or be your own light. These say shine your light. I have a feeling that the hoodies that Tim wants to create are probably going to say be good to yourself. But check out those on Etsy. support us on Patreon if you have the resource to do so and you feel called to. As well, hop on our Discord. Discord, you have a direct line to me and Tim. You can ask Ryan more questions or field them to us so we can get them to Ryan. As he said, we have more recordings coming up. We're going to stay in contact with Ryan because he has a very broad and deep message that needs shared. So let us know how Ryan can affect your life the best.
I'm going to piggyback off of you here real quick, Aaron. Leave questions for Aaron and I. We absolutely love hearing them. We want to answer them. I don't care if you ask me why my toes are pink. Am I going to show you? No. Why am I not going to show you? I'm going to save that for Feedopedia. I don't know what that's called.
Feedopedia?
Feedopedia?
Good
I don't
God.
know.
What a way to end the episode.
The OnlyFans. It's going to be the No Streetlights OnlyFans, where it's just nothing but feet pictures and Aaron rollerblading. But please leave questions for us as well. We really want to hear from you. If you have a thought, or maybe you want to just tell us what your experience on death or what you thought, crazy dreams you've ever had, I would love to hear it. I do want to go ahead and remind everybody here that Aaron and I are not mental health professionals. We do not have a degree. If you need help now, please call 911 or text or call 988 for immediate medical intervention.
If you want protracted support, you can use our code with BetterHelp. It's betterhelp.com/NSLP. Gets 10% off your first month and helps the channel grow quite a bit. Before we run our 3 closing phrases, I want to give a huge shout out to Eric Spears, our first Fireside level patron. Thanks, Eric.
We love you, Eric. Sadunghae, Sadunghae. As always, be good to yourselves and each other.
We love you.
No street lights, but we're finding our way. In the dark, but we've got something to say.